Thank you. Several things from opening governments in this debate. First of all, we like nuclear weapons. We feel that they have brought peace and prosperity to many countries in many regions. We feel that if you don't buy that first level of analysis, that at least we get two precise benefits from them. A, that we had at least fewer escalations of warfare. What does this mean in practice? That means that when you have certain skirmishes, when you have certain conflicts, certain wars, for many reasons which are completely independent of basically owning a nuclear weapon, what happens is that basically you have a principle of mutually assured destruction and plenty of other reasons to be afraid and to de-escalate the conflict, or at least you have active set of incentives not to escalate the conflict to a larger extent. Our burden in this debate is rather simple. We say that they have so far made the world a safer place. By the criteria already aforementioned, we will prove to you that throughout history they've made the world a safer place, and today in the status quo, their existence and the doctrine of mutually assured destruction is basically making the world a safer place. First point of analysis, how mutually assured destruction is a unique fear which basically guarantees peace and de-escalation of conflict, with plenty of examples. Three different sort of scenarios and three different benefits that skew from this, right? So we have, first of all, is basically the best scenario from opening opposition when it comes to like historical examples is probably the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The reason why this has been heavily de-escalated by the fact that you had nuclear weapons is because these people have thoroughly believed that this sort of war, in a moment which was so hyped and so destructive and potentially harmful for everything there, we believe that in this context, the existence of nuclear weapons basically actively deterred these countries from activating in an all-out war. It went to that extent that you even have an individual called Vasily Akhripov, which basically, as an individual soldier, basically actively opted out from pressing the button, actively opted out from engaging in these sort of narratives. We see that this sort of existence prevented these two big countries to engage in full frontal and total warfare, the existence of nuclear bombs. Even if these nuclear bombs haven't necessarily existed, you would still have this Cold War, but it will escalate to a much larger extent because you will not have existential fear for hundreds and thousands, even millions of people, which is a comparative difference from having a nuclear device a bit later. Having a nuclear device than not necessarily having a nuclear device. Secondarily, what we see is that existence of nuclear devices, for example, in Pakistan and India, usually used and have been used to de-escalate the conflict in Kashmir, right? Yes, we're fine with that. The problem is, I'll give you an example, no problem. The thing is, what you have today is not necessarily nuclear bombs. You have like smaller nuclear devices. They can like kill tens of thousands of people, right? Unfortunately, one of the former prime ministers of Pakistan actually threatened with using this in Kashmir, right, to fight off the Indian military, which then in turn means that the Indian army, especially in the region of Kashmir Valley, de-escalated and didn't necessarily went as extreme as it could, right? Because you have like over 600,000 of soldiers there. What they can do is basically be extremely more, significantly more aggressive. And you usually have this as a framework of mind when you're actually considering how extreme will you be in a certain region. Third of all, there are certain countries who have faced the threat of obliteration and complete destruction. One of these countries is Israel, right? We say that these countries, and usually you have political incentives for some countries to be thoroughly attacked and destroyed, need to have this sort of a theory. Now, there is obviously a political debate about whether Israel has a nuclear weapon. We have like several reasons to believe, like for example, Mordecai Vanunu and all of the other people that are actually basically saying that nuclear weapons exist in Israel, to this sort of a deterrent to take place and to have basically been a guarantee for some sort of dissuading invaders from basically obliterating Israel. If that's not the case, I'm pleased the fact that the United States has the nuclear weapons and is able to use it to defend Israel is another deterrent factor for someone to basically come in and destroy an entire country in this region. A bit later, thank you. That means that this actively can prove to be a deterrent for countries which are disproportionately harmed and threatened by other actors and coalition of other actors in history, right? There's plenty of reasons as to why today we won't have necessarily plenty of harms and possible dangers from having nuclear weapons. First of all, we have huge sway and huge control over which countries exactly have nuclear weapons today. We have International Atomic Energy Agency, right? That means that we can basically send our experts and control which countries can have this. We have an entire web of United Nations coalition agreements on which countries can have it. But if you're not persuaded fine. Iran tried to have it. We've had a set of sanctions. We had an entire block of countries not being happy about it and basically preventing Iran from trying this, right? We're not saying that necessarily the world is a safer place if Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. The claim is very simple. The claim is if the threat is that some countries which are not safe, that some countries which are necessarily going to escalate conflicts will get these weapons, we say this is not going to happen in the status quo. Secondarily, it is extremely infrastructurally difficult to obtain these weapons. Now look at example for the Iranian nuclear program, right? Thirdly, the uranium and generally trading in uranium is not a free trade thing, right? It's heavily regulated, it's heavily controlled, and it is a very rare thing. You even had in one part of history Yugoslavia trying to have a nuclear program. It failed for 20 years because we couldn't really attain uranium. What you have basically in the status quo and in the context is also a lack of expertise. You don't have sufficient experts who can basically just go around the place and basically create out of nothing and out of thin air nuclear programs. You don't have basically one nuclear expert from Pakistan, which was basically arrested and found, which actually tried to solve several different countries these sort of programs and has been proven to be a fraud, which means that it can be controlled if these harms are actually accrued. Go.
Nikita Khrushchev drank vodka with breakfast, and in 1956 he threw a shoe at a visiting diplomat. Is it anything other than luck that he didn't set off a nuke during the missile crisis?
Okay, what we say is that, first of all, that's false, because what you had was like an active comparative, or basically people discussing, Soviet diplomats and American diplomats discussing over which things will be a trade-off. The complicated calculus was whether the missiles in Turkey will be there or whether the missiles in Turkey will be out of there, right? Having that in mind, what you had is basically a situation where this compromise was reached. It was secret for 30 years, but it was basically put forth in the public. The second response to that is that what we have today is radically different and like extremely different than a situation where a drunken Nikita Khrushchev, without communicating with the West, can do whatever he wants, right? What we have today basically is a context where you not only have a significant more portion of control, but you have political leaders which are basically checks and balance by many people. You have plenty more communication because we are not anymore only have like one red phone which we can like communicate between different countries. You have plenty of different areas like the UN, regional organization, etc. We can communicate these threats. But we say that even if all this is true, the reason why this was true is because of sheer fear, right? The reason why North Korea, however irrational it seems, didn't really escalate conflict to a larger extent is because even them, which are arguably the most irrational leaders right now, are still not going to escalate the conflict is because they are afraid that the other side has nuclear weapons. The comparative is either all of these countries that have nuclear weapons today have them, along with North Korea and other regimes which are problematic, or no one does. I want to hear that comparative.
I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for their speech and invite the Leader of the Opposition to open the case for their side. Hear, hear.
Dear panel, in essence, okay, it is quite simple. Nuclear weapons uniquely allow you to completely obliterate other country with very, very low cost to yourself. That means you're virtually unaccountable to said nation. At the moment you believe that nations sometimes act out of self-interest, which I think many people do, that means you get far more violent and far more impacts. We think it has a form of impacts, but it's the basic mechanism you're going to outline. 4 things in the speech. One, specifically looking at multilateral destruction. I don't think anyone in the room is going to get it, but I think it's brilliant, so I'm just going to try and say that. To get the rest out of it. Then, slightly simpler, nations with nukes versus nations with nukes. Thirdly, nations with nukes versus nations without nukes. Fourthly, nations with nukes, it should be nations without nukes and the rest of the world. Okay, cool. So on MID, look, the crucial thing is this. Notice that in a world without nuclear weapons, Russia and the US can still do massive kinds of harm to each other, as can India and Pakistan, because you have conventional warfare and they have massive armies and they could possibly not obliterate the whole country, but still completely destroy it. So you have the very basic kind of deterrence. The crucial difference is it is the cost to yourself. That means you need to send your whole population in warfare at the moment you actually want to obliterate the US. On the bit side allowed, you literally have to push only one button. What does crucial mean? So it means deterrence happens on the both sides of the house, because if you get to the point that they no longer care and have to act out of self-defense and literally think all they can do is obliterate you, they can still do that on the other side of the house. That's completely uncomparative. The thing, however, is that on the other side of the house, you won't be scared to do that, because Russia probably didn't want to kill its whole population. You do have to be significantly more scared on that side of the house, because Russia can now just quit the bullet. That means deterrence is the same on the other side, but fear and like the general reason, like the general risk of something going to happen, is far bigger because the cost of the source of aggression are significantly lower. Second big point about mutual assured destruction, like the PO, I really hope you do this in extension with Trump. Okay, it assumes rationality, right? It assumes that politicians or generals are professional. Like empirically speaking, that is completely, utterly false. We just elected Trump, but also when you look at rising nationalism, when you look at many other factors, there's a very real risk that people all might prioritize like destroying the other nation for a very simple reason, or that there are other instances in which you're simply being irrational, to being drunk, or to many, other factors. Proposition bench has to prove the assumption that ladies acts rationally within this that is empirically false. One, rest of you built interwoven. Nations with nuke and nations with nukes. A couple of things are going to happen here. Okay, one, notice that you MAD only works at the moment you're directly being a threat to the other country, right? It means you show that continuously have to show that you're capable, that you're also willing to attack to a certain extent, that your army is there, and that you're willing to use it in many ways. That means you need to do two things. One, you need to keep threatening. You need to remain an active force, and you need to keep directly threatening. There's a reason Russia is like flying big up of the Netherlands every day. It's a very simple reason that it show that they need to be active. But also, when you look at the issue of proxy wars, it does show at the moment you get too much world dominance, we're going to step in. You have to portray to be aggressive in order for MAD to work. But it's crucially less on the ourselves house for the reason I already outlined, that the cost of warfare is significantly lower, means you have less of an incentive to be as aggressive as possible. Two, slightly softer but very important, in terms of rhetoric, it also means that you need to keep convincing your public, you need to calm them down by saying you are willing to do that in a very horrible way. Now, for example, some Israeli politicians have massive incentives to demonize the Iranian population. That's significantly more because you need to convince them that in a very certain instance, you are willing to nuke get out of them and still get elected in the next year. That's why so much anti-Russian propaganda. Leads to massive opposition, and let's see some massive opposition. This is the first reason it's very unsafe. But note that geographically speaking, things are far more risky. I like to talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis. I honestly think that the Cuban Missile Crisis wouldn't be a thing at the moment of our news. Like it might suck when there's some long distance located in Cuba, but it sucks completely more. At the moment, it can literally replace your whole country, right? It's a shame when Myanmar like to it out. I think the stakes are significantly less high at the moment we're talking about nukes which can completely destroy the whole country, right? That means, for example, that Poland got far more stake, and that Russia had to do this because nuclear weapons in Poland would actually mean a direct existential threat to the country. That's significantly less on the arse of the house. It means you get more proxy wars, but also more aggression, making sure these nations directly stay and get to each other. Thirdly, when we look at threatening works. Now, the threatening is a bit like racing the bets in poker, right? Because you get more and more aggressive and saying you're willing to do more and more stuff to you. That's why things slowly escalate. Just as going all in is generally speaking a stupid idea in poker, you want to keep the most extreme, the worst thing actually in your hand in case you start even doing worse things, right? You don't want to put anything on the table. At the moment, you aggressively make mistakes, and basically if all plays more chips, you should get more and more aggression. Invading another country or invading an allied country used to be the most important act of aggression we had. That heavily normalized the things like proxy wars and other wars, for example, in the Middle East during the Cold War, for the very simple reason you always had the other option to fall back on. That means things like proxy wars and other kinds of proxy wars did get significantly worse, far more people died, didn't get safer. Two, nations with nukes and nations without nukes. I already outlined that as a nation with nuclear weapons, you are being virtually inaccountable to any other nation because you can always nuke the shit out of it. That means two things. One, the first thing that means is that we saw many actors do horrible things. Look at Russia, but also look at the US and Iraq and Middle East, etc., etc. They still would have had the opportunity to do so, but at least they would have been accountable to either international actors or to these nations being directly there. There's virtually no accountability. No. We have that accountability either to all international actors or to these nations. It means you get significantly less warfare, a thing that's better. But two, it also means that you have to go to an alliance in order to be protected and to be safe because you need these nuclear weapons because MAD is the only shot you have. It means literally every nation that wasn't India had to pick a side in the Cold War. That's created far more opposition, that's created far more proxy wars, that's created far more people dying and far more dying. No thanks. Thirdly, I meant to take the clothing.
Okay, so your idea about countries wanting to seem aggressive to defend themselves seems to exist on both sides. The idea is that if I have a massive gun, I have to wave it in your face less because you're already terrified. I mean, on your side, America could already carpet bomb Iraq with no cost to itself, so what's the difference?
Now, like the thing is that on my side of the house, we both have like a gun in a locker. So there's the potential that we could use the gun, but no one is going to put in the effort to put in the locker because you need to send out your whole population to destroy another country. On the other side of the house, you have the guns get you lying on the table and all you need to get them in order to shoot them. You basically have your finger and the trigger. I know on the which side of the house I will be scarier. Lastly, note that there are many international actors like states which have nuclear weapons but don't directly have them. I think North Korea is a great example. Crucial thing here, they don't have to be nuclear weapons in order to be massively scary. Now that we don't know that nuclear has a nuclear weapon, but the potential threat that they might have one led to blackmail and led to having massive amounts of power. Two specific impacts. One, it means many states that we love to hold accountable, like North Korea, are virtually unaccountable now. It's significantly less safe for the people living there because they can be abused and oppressed in any meaningful way. There's nothing we can do. But secondly, now that it directly means that at the moment two states strongly dislike each other, that heavily gets escalated. I think relations between Iran and Israel would be perfect on our side of the house, but at the moment people in Israel wouldn't daily fear that Iran could literally wipe them off the bat. I think it would be significantly better. You could less hate, we could less assassination of politicians, and now that like there are few instances of war, they are far more likely at the moment both sides of the house are having use directly. And then let me show you. The crucial difference isn't that people can kill each other, they can kill each other on each side of the house. The crucial question is the cost that they have to do when kill each other. Way significantly lowering those costs, the chances of them killing each other do get far more likely. We saw that in the past. Please vote.
And I thank the Leader of the Opposition for their speech and invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for their side. Hear, hear.
Just a second. I'm not sure that the opposition actually listened to our case. Our burden of proof is not to prove that nuclear weapons made a world a better place, rather the safer place. We are the opening government, and we are the ones who define the metric of safety. We define the safety as how many people die and to which extent wars escalated in the past. It's not our burden to make sure that they will make this world safer in 100 years, in 10 years, or something. Like, it's really written in the motions made rather than make. But even in that, I think we provide enough of the reasons. Let's just go to rebuttal and two things. One, why in the past, the more direct conflict, with much more casualties will be likely to occur. Secondly, why it would last long, why it would be so horrible, etc. So, point number one is, yeah, proxy wars happen and it's bad. We don't show that it's really comparative. Proxy war happened because, like, Russia and the United States usually had, or Russia and China, or the United States and China had different interests in some countries. So therefore, they want to protect their interests. Those interests that were like which ideology you want, which are usually zero-sum ideology. You can't have communism and capitalism, which were so antagonized back then, are usually zero-sum games. So those things are non-comparative. If those interests existed even before, so things like Vietnam, Cambodia, etc., would happen on both sides of the house. The difference is whether you're going to have direct wars that are going to happen here or not. Secondly, they say that there are some countries that are doing bad things like Russia. Well, okay, but this might be true, but we also need to question to which extent it's comparative. Like, yes, Russia is able to do bad things in Ukraine and Georgia, but recognize that there is not just because they have nuclear weapons. Firstly, they have much more people, like number of people who actually can go to war rather than Ukraine, that is like small, you know. Secondly, they have better technology for better weaponry, so regardless of nuclear weapons, they will still be able to do so. Thirdly, like, Ukraine needs to get to the allies, and they say every country needs to get an allies, and it's not true. There was like the movement of countries that were not in none of the alliances, because I was one of them. But even if that is true, that's just the case because some countries are smaller. The smaller, that means that you have a less capability of less arms, less military personnel, less intelligence, etc. Those things are symmetric. They exist regardless of existence of nuclear weapons, so you can't judge the debate upon that. Then they say there is a fear that someone can actually push the button and destroy the bomb. Firstly, we're not sure whether you should care that much about the fear because it doesn't necessarily kill people. We're not sure why there's impact. But moreover, even if it is, probably you're aware that even though it might be really bad to come nuclear war, you are aware that the probability of that is really, really low. Why is that? They said we need to assume rationality. Firstly, you don't have to be really rational, not willing to die. And we believe that lots of people, like leaders, are not behaving that way. That's why they never used nuclear weapons after those, like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because they know there were other countries that could use it back on them. Usually people don't like to die. Even if they are just idiots, there are other people around them, like their relatives, like military personnel that usually can do things like coup d'etat that actually just overthrow those leaders if they're completely behaving weirdly. Also, there are other countries, like North Korea, usually has lots of support of China, and they're doing lots of things because China supports them. This exists regardless of their possession of nuclear weapons. Also, pariah states and failed states exist regardless of possession of nuclear weapons. Yes, North Korea possesses nuclear weapons. Maybe it made a slightly worse North Korea, but recognize that there are lots of countries that don't possess nuclear weapons, and simply we don't care about them, and that's why we don't do anything. Like Zimbabwe is also doing really, really bad things with citizens. Like Somalia don't have even proper guns. That's
still they're destroying lots of people. So it's not just the question of whether you have nuclear weapons or not, but the question of to which extent we care about those issues. Since we didn't care about North Korea acquiring nuclear weapons, we probably wouldn't care it even if it didn't have. So that's why they would probably just be able to do the bad things as well. However, we believe that on the comparative, there are much better issues that are more important that we should just care about. Okay, so let's move to my substantive. Firstly, what is unique fears, and this is completely unresponded to George's speech. Firstly, the mass of destruction, like the level of destruction that you usually don't know, that you usually have huge cities and lots of people living there. You're afraid that everyone can die, nothing you can do. There are no basically really effective shelters. And even there are, that the long-term effects are so devastating, so huge that even now as they're happening, it's something that makes people so afraid of engaging in those conflicts. Why those huge conflicts would be likely? Now recognize that the Cold War had some really interesting ideas behind it. Like two countries, like United States from one side and USSR from the other side, had completely different ideologies that were zero-sum ideologies. One of them was the capitalism, the other was the communism. Secondly, there was also the doctrine of even the plan to attack USSR from the West, like we debated a couple of weeks ago, that just didn't wasn't true because of some of the reasons. So there were lots of reasons why they wanted to engage in that war. Thirdly, there were lots of countries that just had some people who were supporting USSR, some supporting USA, and they were really important. Like lots of countries in Eastern Europe, like lots of countries like Cuba, etc. Fourthly, you recognize that Russians even had their arms and people there in Cuba, and that's why it was really close escalation. But the only thing that deterred the escalation of Russian and American conflict, and also explaining that Georgia never responded by opening opposition, is the fact that you know that they could fight back. It was really devastating. Why did even start of that war will be really devastating? Recognize when countries engage in war, they're not likely just to pull back too early. A couple of structural reasons for that. Firstly, particularly for those countries that are really huge, it's geopolitical disaster simply to show that they are actually pulling too early, especially for the countries that are really in their interest. Secondly, in order to motivate your people to fight, you need to indoctrinate them with the hatred. So there is always indoctrination, but there is difference with indoctrination once when you're in a war and once when you simply don't like Russia because you know Putin. Yeah, the difference is that basically the indoctrination is no, thank you. Indoctrination is much higher. That means that much more people are willing to that just vilify against those issues. That's why it's politically not favorable for you to pull out of the wars once you enter it, even if at the early stage. No, thank you. Thirdly, there are things like sunk cost fallacy. That when people engage a lot and spend lots of resources in something, they feel that they shouldn't pull out because they feel that they're going to lose. That's something we're always doing, especially even if you believe it's a fallacy, politicians cannot just justify that. We can see that happening with, for example, Vietnam War. Even though the United States were losing it for lots of time, they were able just to engage it over and over again because it was really politically unfavorable them from pull out. That is the issue, and that is the comparative here. Without nuclear weapons, we had much more chances of having the start of that escalation. That escalation, for a couple of structural reasons I gave you, will be everlasting, will last alone. What does it mean? It means that lots of people die, not only in proxy war that are non-comparative, but also because they also happen just even without Russia and the United States. Like people in North and South Vietnam could kill each other even without the help of the others. The fact is that usually you have also people from the United States and Russia dying and the other generation dying. Secondly, we believe that the effects of those wars and the destruction of them will be much higher. So why are we from opening government? Because they provide you what is our criteria and our metric. It is really precise, it's really simple. They're never engaged that. On the comparative, save more lives. That is our definition of safety. We urge you have right to do that. So please propose this motion.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for their speech, and once opening opposition finished their love hymn, I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to continue the case for their side. Hear, hear.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to imagine for one moment that in your house you have an axe that is threatening to swing by you and kill your family in a very single slash. Although the company that sold it there has assured you that it is 99.9% chance that it's never going to happen that axe actually slashes, that is not what you as a citizen care about, right? That is not going to make you feel safe. Because all you see is that axe and the constant threat of that falling down, right? We think when it comes to fear, it is not a rational calculation of will Russia drop these bombs, right? Because if citizens see in the news Russia employing and developing nuclear weapons, if they see North Korea building a bomb and testing it in the sea, it is not, they do not make a rational game theory calculation. They see the fear and they are scared for their lives. We think that is truly what escalation means, and that is why we wish to make the world a lot less safe. Three things that I want to explain to you in my speech. First, I want to talk about looking at deterrence, whether it's actually effective with nuclear weapons. Second of all, I want to look at rogue nations, how we make them spin out of control. And third of all, I want to look at fear and industrial escalation of conflicts. So first of all, let's look at deterrence, right? So the crux of the opening government's case was mutually assured destruction, right? Basically saying that a nuclear bomb is so detrimental that you never start a war with each other because you're afraid it might escalate, right? Rule already gave you one response to this, which means that, which is basically to say that you can now also already destroy each other. So there's no reason for America to start a direct ground war with Russia already. It never gave a response to that. That means that people know that America already knows that it is disadvantageous to them and it is dangerous for them to start a direct war. But I'd like to add a second response to this, which is basically to say, even if you know that Russia will never use this nuke against you because then you can use it because then you can simply send one back. That also means that it might be safe for you to send in tanks, right? Because if you send tanks to Russia, Russia's not going to do anything about it by sending nukes, right? Because if they send a nuke, you can easily send one back, right? Which means that the threshold of actually sending in tanks and starting a ground war and leading to escalation is still there. No thanks. But even if we can see that they win this part of the case, right? We think the number of countries that actually have nukes is very small, right? It's only a couple, as they analyzed already, right? They never engage with what this does with the relation between between countries that have nukes and countries that don't, right? We really only see that engage with that because who will explain to you why there's simply no accountability? We can literally obliterate the other country with a touch on the button. We think that skews the balance to the point that smaller countries like Iraq, like Iran, do not agree with American policy, right? On the our side of the house, they could at least threaten by firing back themselves. We think all of these things become way harder. That means that if we have to trade off power balances and what power relations we care about more, we would rather have all of these weaker countries that need our protection the most being safer because stronger countries can no longer oppress them. We think that is much more important, and therefore we'd rather deter powerful countries to deter them. No, thank you, not yet. So then let's talk about rogue nations, right? We explained to you why they will simply spin out of control at the point that they have so much power that they can literally obliterate their enemy, which they would not be able to do on our side, right? Because North Korea spends a lot of money, but their army is nothing compared to that of the US. At the point that they have a nuclear weapon, they can do significantly more damage to us. They gave us two responses to this. They said, firstly, oh, it's very hard to build a nuclear bomb, right? Because you need knowledge and you need resources. First of all, we think historically we have seen that North Korea and also other countries have jumped these hindrances, right? They have stolen exports from the US to work for them, and they've simply gotten uranium out of the ground, right? We already see that they have been testing nukes, and even if they are not able to do so, right, because of their secrecy, we do not really know whether they are actually building it right, which means that they cannot take the risk of saying, well, probably they don't have it right, so we're probably not going to take them seriously. We think we also always have to listen to them. But then they said, well, North Korea would have been powerful anyway because they are friends with China. We think it is we would claim that it is a vastly different power relation when you're friends with China and occasionally trade with them and have diplomatic ties, as compared to when you have the complete power to obliterate a country at the point that they don't listen to you, especially given the fact they have no accountability to the people, so they do not care whether they get bombs. That means that you have further control over these countries and the point that they hold nuclear bombs. Closing.
Iron Dome makes me less scared of that, but what does interest me is the fact that all of the veto holders of the UN Security Council have nuclear weapons. Do you think that there was something about nuclear weapons that led us towards the formation of such organizations?
I'm honestly not sure. If you make that argument, Cambridge is very smart, they will rebut it. Lastly, I want to look at fear, because I think that is something that has been underestimated throughout the whole debate. Because remember the example I gave you about the axe? We think that the exact mechanisms go on in populations as well, right? Team government claims that you now no longer have to swing a gun constantly to threaten to war because you already know that you can kill the other, right? We think it's the exact opposite. You say constant reminder the other person can obliterate you, right? During the Cold War, people all over Europe and in America got threatening news that Russia was building nuclear weapons and they were installing them all around their borders all the time, right? We think that is something incredibly hard to see, specifically given the fact that governments would like to use this in order to scare their people off, right? In order to antagonize other countries, right? It makes it easier for them to gain support and to get attention of other issues, right? The main reason why Putin has so much power is because he's able to divert all of the things that are going wrong with the economy and talk about the fact how he's acting against America and basically fighting them, right? Opening government basically conceded this at the point that they made a whole argument about why people will be so afraid at the point that other countries have nuclear weapons. They thought that was a good thing. We think that is a incredibly bad thing, right? First of all, because it makes people suffer every single day, given the fact that they fear their lives every time that they watch the news. But also it becomes way easier to go to war, right? Ru already talked to you about this when he talked about proxy wars, right? Opening government says, well, indoctrination is easier under either way. What is so much easier at the point that you now have a credible reason to point to the fact that America is actually very powerful and that they can obliterate you. We think that it makes it much easier, right? That means that people are willing to sacrifice our soldiers in order to go into Vietnam and to go into Afghanistan in order to make America less powerful. That means that people start dying back to oppose.
I'd like to thank that speaker for their speech. Indeed, all speakers in the top half, and invite the member of the government to plead the case for their side.
It's not that nukes are powerful that matter in this debate. It's that nukes are symbolic of you having military might that's more powerful than anyone else. It's not symbolic to the other state who has nuclear missiles. It's symbolic to every other country, particularly those who don't possess them but are worried about what you're going to do about it. That's what we think this is a debate about, and that's why we think we have a safer world. Two main points of the speech: why nuclear missiles lead to better negotiations, or at least negotiations in the first place, and secondly, why nuclear missiles have resulted in less conflict on aggregate. Before this, just one main point of rebuttal. They talk about accountability. 4 reasons why people are accountable when they fire nukes. Number one, you risk the ability to lose allies. So, for example, when the US fires a nuke at another country, you significantly lose the ability to negotiate with other countries who are that ally. We think countries are rational and specific on things like trade. They don't want to do that. Secondly, you risk conflict or you risk sanctions at a worse conflict. Like the reason Putin does it when Putin invades Crimea and he gets his economy destroyed at the point which sanctions happen, they're a legitimate thing that our actors fear, particularly when they want their economies to go well. We don't think that's specifically true. More importantly, organizations like NATO and the UN are the biggest way you were ever accountable. At the point which I, as Russia, fire a missile on a country that's a member of NATO, I specifically lose the ability to ever get that. And I have Article 5 means they probably fire back. But even if that's not true, organizations like the UN and other organizations mean it's specifically relevant to me if I ever want to interact geopolitically or care about the world, that other countries trust me enough or are more willing to interact with me. I think you specifically lose that at the point which you're no longer accountable, at the point which you're viewed as that irrational rogue actor. It's true that people don't want to negotiate with North Korea. It's not because North Korea are people who have no incentive to negotiate. It's that North Korea seems people who can never be drawn to the table or never kind of accountable for discussions. That happens when you're a country who people are afraid of firing nukes. At the point which you do that, you lose any ability to get to the table. That's why they don't want to fire it. First point on why nukes lead to better negotiations. Because fundamentally, nuclear missiles are the ultimate symbol of military might. It's not just that they exist in isolation. They represent your ability to show power on a global stage to people on the other side of the world. Why do we think it makes you a global actor worth caring about? Why do we think it's important? Because note that when you have enemies like India and Pakistan, or you have stressed relationships like US and Russia, the single thing that brings them to the table is the fact that they're afraid of each other. It's not a lie to say that the people in the G8 either all host nuclear missiles for other countries or simply possess nuclear missiles of themselves. The reason why that is specifically relevant is because nuclear missiles make you come to the negotiation table. They make you worried about other people, what they're going to do. We think they exist as a serious threat more so than any other circumstance. Note the comparative is how likely these countries are going to come to the table, because geopolitics exists and safety exists on the ability for countries not to be afraid and not to be overtly aggressive to each other. Why do we think they're more likely to do it on our side of the house? Number one, we say when Russia and the US or Russia and the UK have specifically strained relationships at the point which things like sanctions on Crimea happen, they still turn up. Why? Because Russia knows they have to talk to people like Angela Merkel at the point which she has US nuclear missiles hosted in Germany. We think that is a threat that exists when you have specifically realized there are immense signals of power. Even after sanctions, when Germany hosts nuclear missiles, what geopolitics does, it specifically draws you to that table. Particularly in times of stress, we think most of the winning, and this debate is won or lost on whether people are going to be more safe. We think that the times people are the least safe is the times when countries are most stressed with each other, when tensions are the highest, and people are the most afraid of what they're going to do or what that other country is going to act with each other. We think the comparative exists when you're more willing to be drawn to the table at the point at which I might hate Russia and I might never want to negotiate with them economically, or might never want to engage with them as a country, but I know they're a threat to my sovereignty and a threat to my citizens. That's the reason you get people drawn to a table, specifically that you don't get on the other side. Why do we say this is important? Because not knowing facts scares states. The reason why the US moves warships into the South China Sea is they recognize it scares China into intervening with other countries like Japan at the point which it's shown as a direct threat. The comparative is whether they turn up to those meetings or whether they're more willing to engage with those states. We think you're specifically most likely to do that at the point at which you're most afraid, or willing to see them as someone who's either a strong enough ally or someone that's more willing to lose. We think we specifically get that on our side. We think you're more willing to less likely act irrational and more willing to have a proper conversation. I'll take back out.
Why did diplomacy exist before the detonation of the first nuclear bomb?
So countries can negotiate with each other, but we think at the point at which countries are afraid to negotiate with each other, we think at the point at which things like tensions are drawn to a specific stage where like countries are afraid to negotiate, we think on aggregate they're more likely to come to a table at the point at which they view each other as legitimate forces. There's a reason why JFK rang Russia at the point at which the Cuban Missile Crisis was a problem, because they specifically recognized Russia as a threat. And on aggregate, when you are not afraid specifically, more on this later, when you're not afraid specifically of what Russia is going to do on a macro level, you're more willing to do things like individual aggressions would lead to more conflict. Second point, which is on this, because OG are right that mutually assured destruction is an important factor in this debate. But note that only 9 countries in the world specifically possess nuclear missiles. We think their analysis is true, but unlikely to be relevant, because for mutually assured destruction to work, you specifically have to have 2 of these actors to directly engage with each other for there to be mutually assured destruction. I think it's more likely in this debate, and the exact analysis that is most relevant, is you using your nuclear missiles to threaten other countries who specifically don't possess those nuclear missiles and don't possess that level of fear to go against you. Why do we think it's important? Because what states do is they use nuclear umbrellas as a way to intimidate and coerce other countries. It is a fact under status quo that intercontinental ballistic missiles mean I can fire something from space in America and hit Russia without needing to ever have a missile near. But other countries put missiles in other countries. Why do they do that? Because at the point which what proximity fundamentally means is it means fear. The reason why Russia, or the reason why the US hosts nuclear missiles in areas like Turkey is because it points to countries like Iran and Russia and shows them that they have a nuclear missile a couple hundred kilometers from their capital or a couple hundred kilometers from their border. I mean, that is specifically the reason why people are afraid to act. Look, nuclear missiles can be fired from anywhere, but the symbolic gesture of it being so close to your border is the ultimate symbol of power. Why do we think this is particularly important? Because now I, as China, when I'm calculating on conflicts or whether I'm going to engage, I've already taken one, whether I'm going to engage with another state, specifically know that if I as China want to be overtly aggressive to policies like the South China Sea and annex an island in Japan, I specifically can't do that. So that same analysis applies for I as Russia if I want to be overtly aggressive. Can't go near a NATO ally at the point at which I know they're possessed by a nuclear umbrella. We think the comparative is whether countries want to show strength. We think countries want to show strength to be powerful. They're more willing to do that, particularly in strong situations, particularly in high-cost situations like the Cuban Missile Crisis, like things like the South China Sea, when they don't have a comparative to do so and they don't have the direct threat of a nuclear missile. That means you're more willing as a state to do things like annex an island or do microaggressions like move your warships through specific circumstances or engage in small-scale conflict. I think that's what specifically leads to countries developing tensions with each other. Specifically, if their analysis is true, particularly OO's analysis, and countries are irrational with each other and actors can't really decide what they want to do. We think when you have small-level tensions that are brought up, it's specifically more likely to escalate bad circumstances and more likely to cause conflict on the aggregate. We say nuclear missiles are extremely destructive. What's more important and most relevant in this debate is they're hugely symbolic of the power you can do and the protection they grant to other states. That's the reason why the ultimate symbol and the ultimate ability to grant safety to the citizens we're so happy to oppose.
I'd like to thank that speaker for their speech and invite the member of the opposition to continue the case for their side. Hear, hear.
Can we shut the stream off?
I think one reason why this debate is getting a little bit puzzledy is because it's actually quite difficult to say what the difference between a big bomb and a very big bomb is in terms of how it implicates on international relations. Nuclear weapons in many ways, and this is especially to top up, and I will be less flippant later on, will have very little impact in terms of how massive nations will interact with smaller nations who could be beaten by them on every single time. I think Adam does give you two reasonably simple and easy to understand ways that nuclear weapons are different. The first is that it is a constant threat around the world that doesn't depend on you moving an army to a border or specifically increasing aggression or starting a proxy war. Rather, it is there and everybody knows it is there the entire time. And the second is that the way we try to amp it up, if that is ever necessary, is again not to put people in specifically more danger, but instead to make symbolic statements, right? So putting a bomb in Turkey, he tells you, makes no difference to how easy it is to hit Russia or how more ability you have to do it, but instead it scares everybody shitless. A lot of people talk about fear in this debate, but we both concede on both sides that sometimes fear is really necessary in controlling other people's actions and molding how the international states interact with each other. So the first thing I want to talk about is negotiations and why, although people did have the power of speech closing opposition, that's correct, we had more negotiations and better cooperation after nuclear weapons. And second, I want to talk about conflict. But before I do, I should comprehensively deal with the extension we're given. The first is proxy wars are bad. He then gives a long list of reasons why proxy wars are better for individual states to engage in than full warfare themselves. This is to suggest that those proxy wars will still be the preferred method, even if the comparison wasn't nuclear weapons, it was other things. His response to this is that this isn't true. Why? Because in fact, these proxy wars, like first, war is at stake. This seems unclear when warfare is something that is possible on both sides of the house. But he says then second, the reason is because you sometimes a proxy war is starting just over nuclear weapons. We think that the comparison to having nuclear weapons is the necessity to show military strength in a way that nuclear weapons can avoid. So we think that more proxy wars are necessary when you have invasions of land, when you have troops being moved. No, thank you. Instead of simply moving nuclear weapons nearer to borders. That means that in fact you have an added incentive on their side to have wars. The second thing he says is that you're going to have much more nuclear weapons now because Trump does silly things. We would point out that Trump does not unilaterally make all decisions. He's been blocked in most of the things he seems to want to do. General Mads, who seems like an intelligent human being, on his Secretary's defense, and I've no idea why he would continue on with this ludicrousy if he can't even close some hospitals. But what I would point out is that even if this is crucial, Trump succeeds in this, it is a concession on their side, which is to say that nuclear weapons are crucial in that area to maintain stability. That is why other individuals would want nuclear weapons in the absence of the United States access there. It is a concession principally of our case, just messing around with the world, Trump. Finally, they say things could accidentally be set off. I would point out, just to be real nitpicky, that we're living in the world we are. Like, they can't make up a counterfactual where accidentally nukes went off 10 times a day and lots of people died. We are living in the safe world we are because this doesn't happen. But there are reasons for that. Like, there are security codes. You can avert a nuke literally after we fired it. We can shoot down our own nuke to stop it ever hitting. There are fail-safes that mean we can stop this. We have codes and things that drunk men in the morning can't just set off on you. There are obviously reasons why this hasn't happened accidentally, despite having lots of drunk people in charge. First point then, negotiations and why they're likely to happen an awful lot better. We would point out an extension, no thank you, and got very little response to the fact that this is a massive ongoing threat between individuals. Not just because they could blow us up tomorrow, which is crucial, but obviously humans like to think more in advance. Instead of constantly just being at loggerheads, there is an incentive, Adam tells you, to form some sort of union, to have the G8, to have the UN, to have cooperation that drives you together. Adam told you explicitly that Russia and America keep talking to each other, despite the fact that Russia just invaded Crimea. Like, this is the kind of scenario that would have in the past driven people away from the table and they would never engage with each other. And yes, they do in the world today. There is a reason for that. There is an ongoing real fear created by NATO, created by the power behind NATO in terms of nuclear weapons being there. Obviously, closing are correct. We had the League of Nations first. I'm just saying that wasn't fail-safe. Something did go wrong. But there also is a reality that says that more power, no thank you. Like, but the other thing is they can't weasel away from this being like, oh, power is fear, whatever other arguments they want to bring up, because they'll have fear on their side too. People use their armies in this manner constantly. The difference, as Adam told you, is that you can have a symbolic value, which means we stop having to move our troops around in terrifying manners and having that issue. No, thank you. The second thing to say here is that you are less likely to have individual conflicts erupting. So the logic out of first proposition is that I now, in a conflict without nuclear weapons, I have to risk things to myself. The obvious problem here is that if America wanted to like carpet bomb Cambodia tomorrow, there would be no issue to itself, no backlash, no kind of harm that they have to go through. We think that there are a couple of differences though. The first to know, thank you, is that there is no sliding scale with nukes, which means that you are less likely to commit to something ultimate as opposed to entering negotiations on our side of the house. The second thing that is crucial, I think this is logic that underpins the claim that First Prop wants to make. Nuclear weapons are targeted at cities and at the people who make decisions. When I agree to go into warfare, I risk my soldiers. When I antagonize someone who has a nuclear weapon, I risk myself. That is why, although rationality is a bizarre construct that doesn't really exist, we can have more of it on our side, because we do think that people are more self-interested in terms of the decisions that they make with nuclear weapons rather than with their soldiers. Closing.
Okay, here's the comparative. On our side, without nuclear weapons, Pakistan and India go to war, and the winner controls Kashmir, and they live a good life. On your world, because of nuclear weapons, never-ending proxy conflict in which thousands never get political self-determination and die every day.
Conflicts don't end that easily. Like Jesus, if the Irish gave up that quickly, what would have happened to us? The idea that someone will win the war and then everyone will stop is not a point of information he can say without a room laughing at their extension. The reality is, this is really, really important. There will be ongoing conflict on both sides. There will, of course, be resurgencies and violence, but we think there is more of a stalemate. It's actually correct that people still launch, roll tanks in on each other, and they do still, to some extent, ignore nuclear weapons. This isn't perfect. Proxy wars still happen. But I think if you're going to analyze it on that level, the nuclear weapons make no difference to debate whatsoever. We think that it is true to say that they'd be massively lessened because people are to an extent afraid that nuclear weapons could actually become something that's important. Finally, then, to round off this thing on conflict, we want to point out that it is massively important that individuals are able to be held in line by larger nations. They say this is a problem because China is largely in charge. Nuclear weapons were invented by the Americans. The Americans still have Iron Dome, which defends themselves, and they've extended to Israel. The reality is that there is a massive benefit to those who I would like to consider at times the good guys or the liberals. There is a reality that says that you can have some form of dominance that people have to engage with that doesn't involve me threatening. That America doesn't have to carpet bomb to remind people about, that you don't have to have proxy wars or violence. I mean, guns are always bad, but it's not nukes that kill people. We're very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank that speaker for their speech and invite the opposition whip to conclude the case for his side. Hear, hear.
Yeah, sure. In 1907, the British Empire launched what was then the greatest instrument of war ever invented. It was called HMS Dreadnought. It had turrets and revolving guns. It had a steam-powered turbine, and it was the ultimate symbol of military might. And the reason I bring this up, and the reason that I have to chuckle at the closing government extension, is that everything they say about nuclear weapons literally applies to every single big new development in military technology that has ever happened. In any given era, there will be a piece of military technology or a symbol of military might which trumps all other symbols of military might. In the 19th century, it was the dreadnought. Before that, it was cannons. Before that, it was Mongol horse archers. But either way, it has always been relatively obvious where military power lies in the world and which countries have military power in the world. The idea that nuclear weapons are somehow different from this is, we think, ridiculous. The reason being that although nuclear weapons are bad, and obviously and self-evidently bad, they are bad and they are scary because they are the worst thing of which we can possibly conceive. back 500 years ago, the worst thing of which I could possibly conceive was probably a horde of fucking Mongols, right? So either way, the symbol remains scary throughout history. We simply don't understand what is so different about nuclear weapons that somehow wins this debate foreclosing governments. If you want empirical evidence as to why their extension is bollocks, look at the fact that diplomacy has been going on for the best part of human civilization. I'll ask 3 questions in this speech. Firstly, who has nukes? Secondly, why does this matter, which is subtitled What Happens When One Goes Off? And thirdly, even if they don't go off, why do we still win this debate? So, where are nuclear weapons at the moment? Opening government tries to, I think, shy away from their burden a bit in this debate, because they said, we like nukes, but it's fine, because hardly anyone has them. Let's look at the analysis as to why they think very few people have nukes. They say it's very expensive to get it. Yeah, it might be expensive, but countries still spend loads of money trying to get it. Iran literally bankrupted itself trying to obtain a nuclear bomb. And the reason for that is that they see it as an infinite reward, so they will spend an infinite amount of money trying to get it. Secondly, they say we don't have experts. My first response is that Assad tells me there are physicists in Pakistan. You're racist if you disagree. Secondly, we're just going to call the lie on how much expertise they need to create a nuclear weapon. When I was 14 years old, I learned that enough critical mass of uranium in one place becomes sufficiently unstable to create a dirty bomb. It doesn't necessarily, we're not saying they're going to create Polaris missiles overnight, but we are going to say that they're going to be able to put enough fissile material together to create a fucking massive poisonous cloud, right? And that's probably just as bad. Secondly, they say uranium's hard to come by. There are mines in most countries in the world, and also you can buy it for legitimate purposes. So you have the fact that Iran buys a shit ton of uranium from the West every day. But moreover, we tell you, this fundamentally ignores the context in which this debate takes place. The USSR collapsed 20 years ago, leaving stockpiles of nuclear material and fissile material all over Eastern Europe and all over Central Asia. That stuff's been on the black market for about 30 years now, and it's going to the highest bidder. That's how North Korea got nuclear weapons in the first place. So the answer to my first question of summary of who has nukes is the answer is pretty much anyone who wants them, right? The vast majority of countries in the world who want them have ongoing nuclear weapons programs. North Korea, Israel, Iran, probably South Africa and Brazil, if you read the article in The Atlantic that came out a few weeks ago. And that has profound geopolitical implications, which I'll touch on in my last issue. But perhaps more importantly, you can't control who within a state has access to these weapons, because states are not homogenous entities. They are made up of competing different power groups. That's why Musharraf was able to invade India pretty much unilaterally in the late 90s, as Assad told you. So why does this matter so much? Why does it matter that everyone who wants access to a nuke can access a nuke? The subtitle of this point is how nuclear weapons will probably go off in the next couple of years. The first scenario here is that dissidents within a state wants to start a conflict and want to set up nuclear weapons. Assad gave you the mechanism for how this could happen when he explains that rogue states tend to use fundamental like apocalyptic rhetoric, which ideologically brainwash dissidents into basically hating the enemy. The fact that the Ayatollah consistently invokes the end of the world probably means that his followers are brainwashed to some extent into not seeing that as that much of a harm. Note that this is independent of all the accountability mechanisms that both gov teams try to put it. Musharraf can set up a nuclear weapon on both sides of the house, but more importantly, it can happen not deliberately. It can happen in effect by accident. The USA dropped a nuclear bomb on South Carolina in the 1950s, and in the 1960s, like a mechanic dropped a wrench down the silo of a Polaris missile and damn near blew up the whole of North Dakota, though probably no one would have noticed. Either way, look, accidents happen, mistakes happen. Assad gave you the mechanisms by which they happen. And once a single nuclear weapon's gone off by accident, suddenly you're in a situation where Russia's panicking and probably firing off the nuclear missiles. No, thank you. Adon's response to this is that it hasn't happened yet. Yes, nuclear weapons have been around for 60 years, but fortunately time is a geometric sum to infinity, and we have literally the rest of time in which this could happen. On a balance of probabilities, the fact that an accident has not happened yet is not necessarily an argument for the fact that an accident never will happen. Nuclear weapons are going to go off at some point on their side of the house. Why does this matter so much? Because it obviously outweighs the biggest impacts they have in this debate. Their biggest impact is fewer escalations of proxy wars. So maybe a few more 100,000 people died in Vietnam. 500,000 people died in the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki versus 58,000 US casualties in Vietnam. Literally a difference of 10 times. The first time a nuclear bomb goes off, their impact simply fall out of this debate. Oh, Belgrade, fine.
Yeah. So we gave you structural reasons why direct conflicts are bad. Like hatred, indoctrination, sunk cost fallacy. That's why even if it happens one accident in the future that just might happen, this is much worse because those are the things that are
I have
probably
no, I have no idea why hatred and indoctrination and rivalry between nations do not result independent of direct conflict or through proxy wars. See as the fact that Russians and Americans hate each other even though they've never explicitly gone to war. So, final point of summary. Even if nuclear weapons don't go off, why is this so terrible? The race to get to nuclear weapons has harms in and of itself. Because as soon as one country attempts to get a nuclear weapon, all its neighbors panic and start proxy wars, as is currently happening between Iran and Saudi Arabia. This is literally about to happen because Donald Trump has basically given the green light to anyone in the world who wants to get a nuclear weapon to get a nuclear weapon. So why is that so important in and of itself? It's because proxy wars are, as Assad explained to you, significantly worse than the worst harms that can occur on your side of the house, because effectively there is no end game to a proxy war. You have no one with whom you can negotiate. Your enemy is not someone with a face. Your enemy is not someone with whom you can negotiate because it's all deniable and you have no idea who is in charge of anything. Ultimately, these are conflicts which can spiral on literally for generations. Kashmir is the perfect example of this. At the end of this debate, I'm pretty sure one of these things is going to go off because people are careless and life is shit, and then we all die sooner than you might think. I oppose.
I'll invite that speaker for his speech. Indeed, all speakers in the debate. But let's put your hands together one more time for the speakers.